When a man flies his drone over a friend's sheep farm, he believes he's going to get ordinary footage of animals grazing the fields. But what he ends up seeing is something that happens only once in a lifetime, and no one would have believed him if he hadn't captured it. "Dad, there's something wrong with the drone. It's picking up a weird signal," Jake called out, squinting at his controller screen. Martin Walker, 62, turned his head towards his son. He had been chatting with his old friend Richard Carson, who owned the sprawling sheep farm Jake was now observing with his drone. "What do you mean?" he asked. He didn't know much about these new technologies and barely understood how a flying device could pick up a signal, let alone a weird one. "Is something wrong with the sheep?" Richard asked. As an older gentleman himself, he too was not familiar with drones and technology in general. However, his farm wasn't thriving like it used to. Labor shortages, unpredictable weather, and a declining market for wool had left him struggling to make ends meet. When Jake had volunteered to make a promotional video showcasing the beauty of Richard's farm, he had accepted the help wholeheartedly, hoping some publicity would spark some interest among the younger generation of townsfolk. Jake had promised to capture the sprawling fields, the beautiful backdrop, his flock of sheep, and even some of the newborn lambs. He would showcase the raw beauty of the farm, reminding young people around the country that not all breathtaking sights need a Wi-Fi connection. However, the signal the drone was picking up was unmistakable. There was a strong magnetic field around the area. But that was not the most shocking part. The drone's camera revealed a bizarre sight. Hundreds of sheep were arranged in neat, uniform rows on a grassy field. The rows extended in a grid-like pattern, perfectly aligned as though someone had placed them there. "What in the world?" Martin said, leaning in for a closer look. Richard chuckled nervously. "Sheep do weird things sometimes. They probably just grouped up naturally." But Jake wasn't convinced. The arrangement was too precise, too deliberate. He brought the drone lower for a closer look, but the sheep didn't scatter. They stayed perfectly still, their formation unbroken. "This isn't normal," he muttered. Then the drone steered abruptly as if it had smashed against something concrete, like an invisible wall in the air. "The magnetic field I'm picking up is really strong. Do you have any idea what could be causing it?" Richard shrugged. "I didn't even know there was one. Are you sure your device is working correctly? There's not much out here besides grass and sheep." Jake didn't push the issue, but as he packed up the drone for the day, he couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was happening. When Richard mentioned over dinner that the sheep had been behaving oddly for the past few days, Jake's ears perked up. "They've been restless at night, bleeding more than usual, and during the day they keep grouping together like that," Richard said. "Maybe they're reacting to something in the environment?" Jake suggested. "Something that might be causing that strong magnetic field, perhaps." "Could be, but this land's been in my family for generations, and I've never seen anything like this before," Richard replied. As they talked, Jake's mind raced. He decided he'd fly the drone again the next morning to investigate further. He woke up early the next day, unable to shake the image of the sheep's strange formation. He launched the drone again, this time focusing on different parts of the farm. To his astonishment, the sheep were once again neatly arranged in rows. However, the pattern had shifted slightly, now resembling concentric circles spreading outward. Martin and Richard joined him outside, sipping their morning coffee. "Jake, are you still obsessing over those sheep?" his father asked, half joking. "Look at this," Jake said, showing them the live feed. The sheep's movements were synchronized, almost as if they were following an invisible trail. Even Martin, who had initially dismissed Jake's concerns, furrowed his brow. "Okay, that is strange," he admitted. Jake brought the drone lower, hoping to understand what the sheep were reacting to. That's when he noticed something unusual on the ground. Faint markings, barely visible under the grass. "Richard, have you noticed those lines before?" Jake asked. Richard squinted at the screen. "No, can't say I have. Might just be old tractor tracks." But Jake wasn't convinced. The lines formed intricate shapes, almost like symbols. He decided to map the field using the drone's high-resolution camera. Over the next hour, he captured images of the entire area and stitched them together on his laptop. The result was astonishing. The markings formed a massive geometric pattern that covered the entire field. "This can't be a coincidence," Jake said. "It's too detailed, too precise." Richard scratched his head. "I don't know what to tell you. This land's been here for centuries. If there's something under it, no one's ever found it." Jake's curiosity deepened when he noticed an area where the grass appeared darker and healthier than the surrounding field. He pointed it out to Richard, who agreed to investigate. The three of them walked out to the spot, their boots crunching against the soil. The air felt heavier as they approached the area. Richard dug a small hole with a spade and unearthed a clay tile with strange carvings on it. "What is this?" he whispered, brushing off the dirt. The tile had an intricate design that mirrored the markings Jake had seen from the drone. Jake snapped a photo and sent it to a local historian he knew from his photography projects. Later that evening, his friend called back, his voice filled with excitement. "Where did you find this?" the historian asked. "It's on my friend's farm," Jake replied. "Why?" "That tile looks like it's from the Neolithic period. It could be part of an ancient site," the historian explained. Jake's heart raced. If the historian was right, they might have stumbled upon something extraordinary. "Dad, Richard," Jake said after hanging up, "we need to dig deeper." Richard hesitated. "Jake, I don't want to tear up my field. This farm's all I have." "I understand," Jake said, "but something down there is upsetting the sheep. What if it's dangerous for them, for you? What if there's something radioactive buried in the ground?" Richard was upset by the possibility, but agreed to think about it. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He replayed the drone footage over and over, trying to make sense of what he had seen. The following morning, he convinced Richard to allow him a bit more time to investigate. Jake set up his drone for another flight, this time focusing on capturing every detail of the field and the surrounding areas. This time, the sheep had formed a spiral pattern, as if they were circling an invisible point. Jake maneuvered the drone lower, capturing a perfect bird's-eye view of the hypnotic scene. "Richard, you need to see this," he called. Richard and Martin hurried over, their expressions a mix of awe and concern as they stared at the live feed. "I think they're responding to something underground," Jake said. "It's like they're picking up on vibrations or some kind of signal we can't hear. It must be this mysterious magnetic field." Richard frowned. "I don't like the sound of that. What if it's truly something radioactive? I've lived on this land for decades. Does it mean I've been exposed to something lethal?" Jake shuddered as he considered the possibility. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. You look as healthy as can be, as do your sheep. But there's only one way to find out what's making them behave so strangely." Using the drone, Jake mapped the area again, this time overlaying the footage with a heat detection filter he had recently installed. To his surprise, the drone picked up faint heat signatures in the ground below the spiral formation. "There's definitely something down there," Jake said, his voice tinged with excitement. Reluctantly, Richard agreed to let Jake and Martin dig deeper into the field. They returned to the spot where they had found the clay tile and began to excavate, using a combination of hand tools and a small portable digging machine Richard kept for farm work. Jake also brought a portable Geiger counter with him to make sure they weren't entering radioactive territory. As they dug, they uncovered more clay tiles, each with similar intricate carvings. The deeper they went, the more it became clear they were uncovering something man-made. "Look at this," Martin said, pulling out a large piece of stone with a carved border. "This doesn't belong in a sheep field." Richard wiped the sweat from his brow. "This is starting to feel like a bad idea. What if we're touching radioactive material?" Jake reassured him. "The Geiger counter is not picking up anything suspicious. To be fair, it looks more like an ancient burial site than a danger zone. If this is what I think it is, it could put your farm on the map in a good way." As they continued to dig, the unearthed tiles began to form a larger picture. They appeared to be part of a circular structure, perhaps an ancient ceremonial platform. The patterns on the tiles matched the strange movements of the sheep, as if the animals were instinctively drawn to the area. By evening, they had uncovered a massive circular stone slab at the center of the spiral. Its surface was covered in carvings that seemed to depict sheep, stars, and geometric patterns. "Jake," Richard said, his voice trembling slightly, "what have we gotten ourselves into?" The discovery of the stone slab left everyone uneasy. That night, as the three of them sat around the dinner table, the atmosphere was tense. Richard kept glancing out the window toward the field, as if expecting something to happen. "We need help," Jake said. "I'm not an archaeologist. If this is an ancient site, we need professionals to investigate." Richard sighed. "Bringing in experts means publicity, and publicity means my farm becomes a tourist attraction. I'm not sure I want that kind of attention." Jake understood Richard's hesitation, but argued that they couldn't ignore the significance of what they had found. After much debate, they compromised. Jake would contact a local archaeologist discreetly to evaluate the site without drawing too much attention. The next day, the archaeologist, Dr. Elaine Foster, arrived. Elaine was experienced and no stranger to uncovering hidden relics in unlikely places. When Jake showed her the drone footage and the tiles they had uncovered, her eyes widened with disbelief. "This is remarkable," she said. "If your findings are accurate, this could be a Neolithic ceremonial site. These patterns, they're not random. They're deeply symbolic, possibly tied to one ancient rituals involving livestock." As Elaine examined the stone slab, she explained that ancient communities often used such sites to celebrate seasonal changes, honor deities, or ensure the fertility of their herds. But what's truly fascinating, she added, is the behavior of the sheep. If they're responding to this sight, it suggests a connection we don't fully understand. Elaine recommended a deeper excavation, but Richard was hesitant. The idea of tearing up more of his field didn't sit well with him. As the group debated their next steps, Jake decided to fly the drone one more time, hoping to gather additional footage for Elaine. What the drone captured sent chills down his spine. The sheep were no longer in the spiral pattern. Instead, they had formed a perfect grid, their movements eerily synchronized. From above, the scene looked like an intricate quilt of white dots against the green grass. Elaine gasped. "This is beyond anything I've ever seen. It's as if they're following an unseen force." Richard shook his head. "This is getting too strange. I'm starting to think we shouldn't have touched that slab." Elaine assured him they weren't in any danger, but even she couldn't explain the sheep's behavior. Her professional Geiger counter was silent too, meaning that no radioactive item was creating the disturbance. So what was? Later that evening, Jake reviewed the drone footage frame by frame. That's when he noticed something new. Faint, glowing lines radiating outward from the stone slab, visible only under the drone's infrared filter. "Dad, Richard, you need to see this," Jake said, pulling them over to his laptop. The glowing lines appeared to connect the stone slab to other parts of the field, forming a network of shapes and symbols. "It's like a map," Jake said. "But a map of what?" Richard's unease grew. "I don't know what we've uncovered, but I think we need to stop before we go any further." Despite his concerns, Jake couldn't let it go. The glowing lines captured by the drone had added an entirely new layer of mystery to the site. Despite Richard's growing unease, Jake convinced him to dig deeper. With Dr. Elaine Foster's guidance, they expanded the excavation around the central stone slab. The deeper they dug, the more they uncovered. A network of interconnected tiles, each with intricate carvings. The carvings extended outward in concentric circles, mimicking the patterns the sheep had been forming above ground. When the workers found traces of iron in the soil, they realized that the magnetic field they were picking up was caused by an abundance of iron-made items scattered underground. But the field was not as shocking as the shapes of the carving themselves. "This is incredible," Elaine said, running her fingers over one of the tiles. "It's as if the entire field was designed to be seen from above. But why?" Jake suggested flying the drone again to see how the site looked from the air now that more of it was exposed. As the drone ascended, the live feed on Jake's controller revealed the breathtaking scope of what they were uncovering. From above, the site resembled a massive labyrinth, with pathways and symbols radiating outward from the central slab. It was clear this was no ordinary farm field. "It looks like an ancient map," Jake said, zooming in on the feed. "But what's it pointing to?" As the team worked, the sheep's behavior grew even stranger. They no longer wandered the field aimlessly, but instead gathered around the edges of the excavation site, bleating loudly as if trying to communicate. "Are they guarding it?" Martin asked, half joking. "It's like they know something we don't," Elaine replied, her tone serious. Then, as Jake flew the drone lower to capture more details, the feed suddenly flickered. The drone's camera picked up a faint glimmer from beneath the central stone slab, something metallic reflecting the sunlight. "What is that?" Jake asked, narrowing his eyes. "More iron?" The team decided to focus their efforts on removing the central slab. It was heavy and required the use of a small winch from Richard's barn. As they carefully lifted the stone, everyone held their breath. Beneath the slab was a large hollow chamber. The air was cool and damp, and the faint metallic glimmer they had seen earlier came from an object resting at the center of the chamber. Jake climbed down cautiously, flashlight in hand. What he found left him speechless. "It's a box," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "A metal box, covered in carvings just like the tiles." Elaine joined him, her hands trembling as she examined the box. The carvings were more intricate than anything they had seen so far, depicting what appeared to be constellations, animals, and figures in ceremonial poses. "This isn't just a ceremonial site," Elaine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This box, it's a time capsule." Carefully, they brought the box up to the surface. It was heavy and sealed tightly with no visible way to open it. Elaine suggested they take it to a nearby university lab for proper examination, but Richard was hesitant. "This has been on my land for centuries," he said. "I'm not letting it out of my sight." Elaine nodded. "Fair enough. But we need to document everything carefully. This is the kind of discovery that happens once in a lifetime." Jake couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. If the drone hadn't captured the sheep's strange behavior, none of this would have been uncovered. The days following the discovery were a whirlwind. Elaine brought in a small team of experts to help examine the box on site, keeping the operation as low-key as possible to avoid drawing attention. After hours of meticulous work, they finally managed to open the box. Inside, they found a collection of artifacts, small clay figurines, tools, and what appeared to be an ancient manuscript written on thin, preserved bark. Elaine's team was ecstatic. The artifacts were in pristine condition, providing a rare glimpse into the lives of the people who had once inhabited the region. "What we have here," Elaine explained, "is a ceremonial time capsule, likely buried to mark a significant event. The carvings suggest it's at least 4,000 years old." The manuscript, though fragile, was decipherable enough to reveal a surprising twist. It included instructions for the ritual that had likely taken place at the site. The sheep, it seemed, had been central to the ceremony, their movements guided by an ancient understanding of the land's magnetic fields. "It's as if the land itself remembers," Elaine said, "and the sheep are still connected to it in ways we don't fully understand." For Richard, the discovery was bittersweet. While the attention brought new opportunities for his struggling farm, it also meant his quiet life would never be the same. Offers poured in from museums and researchers, all eager to study the site and its artifacts. "You were right," Richard admitted to Jake one evening. "If your drone hadn't captured this, no one would have believed it, and I wouldn't have wanted to dig it up. But now, I'm glad we did." Jake, meanwhile, found himself in the spotlight. His footage of the sheep and the excavation went viral, earning him recognition as a filmmaker and photographer. Offers for collaborations and projects poured in, giving him the chance to turn his passion into a full-time career. As the weeks turned into months, the site was officially designated a protected archaeological zone. Researchers continued to study the artifacts and the sheep's behavior, uncovering new insights into the ancient world. Richard's farm became a local landmark, drawing visitors from around the world. Though the increased attention was overwhelming at times, Richard took pride in knowing his land had preserved such an important piece of history. Jake finally stood on the hill overlooking the excavation site, his drone hovering nearby. He watched as the sheep grazed peacefully, their strange behavior a distant memory. "This really does happen once in a lifetime," he said to himself, a smile spreading across his face. And with that, he launched the drone higher into the sky, capturing one last shot of the field, a reminder of the mystery and wonder they had uncovered together. Do you think moments like this are truly one in a million? What would you have done if you witnessed it yourself? Thanks for watching, and don't forget to join us next time for more incredible stories that will leave you in awe.